looking to rent a place, please do not pick the cheapest or the prettiest place you found online. Where you live can affect your money, your stress levels, your commute, honestly, your quality of life. So in this video, I'm breaking down what to consider when choosing a place to rent as a new immigrant in Canada. Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Ify and this is Ify's Beats. Here I share with you my experiences living in Canada as a Nigerian and a new Canadian citizen. Please subscribe if that is your sort of thing. So the first decision you want to make is outside downtown or downtown. Downtown can be really good because it means a walkable area, usually closer to transit and most likely closer to jobs. If you like having a social life, downtown is usually perfect for this. Downtown also means sometimes higher rent. I would say this one is heavily dependent on where you live. For example, in Edmonton, there are older buildings downtown and sometimes the rent is not necessarily always higher than the suburbs, but I would say mostly higher rent. And then downtown is usually more noisy. Obviously, as I said earlier, if you like having a social life, downtown is perfect because the noise, it's always alive. The stores close later. But if you prefer a more quieter life, then living in the suburbs will be probably better for you. And suburbs also have very walkable areas. You know, we have like trails. I currently live in the suburbs, so there are walking trails all around me. But obviously, this is not very good for transit. When you stay outside downtown, the chances that you're closer to your job is less. Let's say you're renting before you find the job. Chances that if you're downtown, commuting to your job will be easier than when you're in the suburb. If you're in the suburb and you get a job on the other end of the city, then it's going to take you longer getting to that part. But when you're downtown, it almost feels like you're always halfway between every part of the city. So it makes more sense to be downtown, especially if you've not found a job versus if you've already found a job. Then if you found a job, you already know that whether you're far from your job or not. And usually suburbs tend to be cheaper because landlords would consider the fact that you're already far away from the city center. But there's also the fact that with newer buildings, it can still be, pretty pricey. My own personal experience, I didn't live downtown. Honestly, I don't think I've ever lived downtown since I've been here. I started with the suburbs. And honestly, the houses were nicer. I tried to rent downtown. But I remember coming out, it was so busy. The area I was looking for that were within my price budget were busy, they were loud, they were smelly. I was like, I don't know. And I just picked the suburb. The suburb had a nicer house. It was just better, but I suffered. I saw shaggy when it came to commutes. Commuting to whatever job, wherever I found a job, was always a hassle. If you're already here in Canada, you know how commuting can be. If you're using the transit, a place that is usually 15 to 30 minutes, with a bus, it can take you like 1 hour, 30 minutes, 2 hours, 2 hours, 30 minutes. It can be such a hassle. And it means that it adds longer, like you have to wake up way earlier than you would have if you were staying downtown. And the chances that you have a car as a new immigrant tends to be slimmer. The next thing is, which honestly ties back to what I just said, is commute. If you already have your job or school, whatever you're doing, this is the most important thing. Check for the commute time. Don't just look at, it's a short distance. Check how long it takes the bus to get there, because sometimes some places are short, but because there is no direct bus to to that location, sometimes it becomes a 2-bus ride. Now if you're going to take 2 buses to a particular place, you're also going to have to consider when you stop before the next bus comes. That already adds to the time for your commute. So it's a very big thing. So don't just say, when you are checking Google Maps for the commute time, check if you're going to be using public transit. Obviously, if you're going to use your car, that's fine. If you're going to be using public transit in your first years, check the commute time with bus and make sure that it is a reasonable time you're willing to live with. So if you can wait till you have a job before you find a place, even better. But I know that that's an ideal situation and it's not what everyone has, which at the end of the day makes it more logical for you to pick downtown versus other parts of the city. Because as I said earlier, when you're downtown, you're in the middle of the city, so you are almost always halfway to a particular location, and there are more transits, there are more buses around downtown, because from every part of the city buses go downtown, so you can always find a bus heading to a particular place. But if you're on the opposite end of the city from where you get a job, you might not have a bus heading going from that particular spot to where you get a job, and you might find that it makes your commute time even longer. And this is honestly what affects commute time most of the time. So the next thing, which honestly I feel like is the most important one, because if you don't have a job, you can't honestly control number two, which is commute. But if you already if whether you have a job or you don't have a job, this one you can control it, which is access to public transit. Whenever you are renting, whether you're already renting from Nigeria before you land, check that there is transit there. In fact, even better is that you have a transit center close to you, but that's the ideal situation. You most likely won't get a transit center all the time, but look for homes close to a transit center. Now, we have bus stops and we have transit centers. So bus stops are just what it is, a bus stop, a bus where the bus stops and picks people up and drops them off. So you most likely will not have more than two buses using one particular bus stop, like two buses using a particular location. It's usually two, sometimes three. When you are living downtown, some bus stops are taking like three. They are bus stops for like three different or four different. I don't know if I've seen five, but I've seen a lot of buses in one bus stop. But when you are staying in the suburbs, most of the time one bus stop is only handling like two types of buses going. It doesn't go more than that a lot of times. Then another thing you're looking at is the bus stop close to your house. You're looking at the transit time. So is the bus stop 2 minutes from your house? A 2 minutes walk is short, but in the winter it can feel bad. But think of a 5 minutes walk in the winter. In Alberta, for example, it gets to -30. You're walking for 5 minutes in the winter. It's not funny. It is hell. So actively consider a bus stop. If you are renting from Nigeria, please check on Google Maps. What is the bus stop? What is the distance from the house to the bus stop? It is very, very important. And another thing is, if you already have a job, then it makes it easier for you. Consider that bus you're taking. Some buses will stop closer to your office than others. So consider, okay, the bus that is going to get to my office, what is the commute time in between that bus station and my office? So if it's, you might get a bus, you might get a home where the bus stop to your home is, say, 2 minutes, but when the bus doesn't get very close to your office, maybe it's a 10 minutes walk from where it stops to your office, and there's no other bus that will take you to your office, so you have to walk for 10 minutes. So imagine walking for 10 minutes in the winter. It is hell. To you is consider all that, but obviously if you don't have a job, it's not something you can consider. Now back to the bus stop and the transit center talk. So bus stops only serve 1 or 2 or 3 buses. The buses are using particular routes. But transit centers is where all the buses come and park. So there are usually multiple transit centers around the city. So transit center. So when a bus is moving, for example, I think I'm trying to make sure I'm explaining this well. When a bus is moving, they usually start from one transit center and end at another transit center. Sometimes some bus routes start from one transit center, go in a circle, and end back at that same transit center. But the point is transit center to transit center. So in a particular area, there are going to be multiple bus routes, all feeding 2 transit centers. Now, because they are feeding those 2 transit centers, it means that each transit center has more buses. But when your house is close to a transit center, you have access to more bus options than someone whose house is just close to a bus stop. I'm saying this because I live close to a transit center, and honestly, it made my life way more easier. There were times that the car wasn't available, and I would just go to the transit center. I'm able to move in a reasonable amount of time. It was way better than when I stayed at a home close to a bus stop. The reason, for example, let's say I'm headed downtown. There were always going to be more bus options because I was living close to the transit center. But when I was staying in the other place that was just close to a bus stop, the bus would take me to one transit center, and then from that transit center, I would take other buses. But imagine you already live at the transit center. And then, for example, here in Edmonton, some transit centers have the train station, like the I'm trying to remember the name right now, the central train station, the one that starts off at there's this building called Louvre. That train, I've forgotten what the train line is called, but that train, imagine you are living close to that train, or you live close to Southgate, you know, it means your commute is way easier. Honestly, you and someone who is living downtown can compete because you live close to a transit center. So that's something you should consider. If you can get a home close to a transit center, I would say that's your best bet. And then if not, get a home close to a bus stop. You don't want to be running in -30. So number 4 is rent price and the total monthly cost. Obviously this one, your budget, what's your budget like, what is the total rent and what is the total monthly cost of the place you're getting? Because if you're, for example, you're coming in alone, you don't have a family, and you're thinking, oh, maybe I should get an apartment, but it's going to come with other costs. It's not just the rent. You're most likely going to be paying a water bill and a light bill, depending on where you stay. Other cities might have other things you're paying for in different parts of the country. But then, if you're getting a shared apartment, from a lot of shared apartments, they tend to lump all the other utilities together. So if they're telling you, oh, your bill is $800, there's a chance that $800 might also be covering electricity and other things in the bill. So consider the whole monthly cost and not just the rent. It's very important because your utilities can take a small chunk of your salary. Same thing with renting a house. Some people come in with their families and they want to stay in a house right away. They don't want to have an apartment because maybe they have kids and they need more space. A house, aside the rent, might cost you more because some landlords will not cover the other utilities. Utilities in a house is even more than the utilities you are paying for in an apartment or a condo. So it's something you should actively consider. It's not just the rent, it's the monthly cost. So does it fit in your budget? You want to make sure that you can afford your rent. I feel like that's common sense, but yes, you want to make sure you can afford your rent. Sometimes when you're not thinking about the total amount, you don't realize that an apartment that seems cheaper on paper, by the time you add all the utilities, it costs just as much as another apartment that seems more expensive, but the utilities are already included. And then you end up going for a lower quality apartment because you thought it was cheaper. Meanwhile, it's almost the same thing. Maybe the difference is like $50. So put that in mind. Number 5 is safety. So now I know we're in Canada, and especially coming from Nigeria, I had this impression that Canada was generally safe. They are quite lovely people. And yes, Canadians, including myself, we are lovely. But not all areas in Canada is safe. So you have to have that in mind. I told you about my experience wanting to rent downtown, and one of the reasons I was like put off from renting downtown, even if I did not have to be put off, I could have just looked for a better place. But one of the reasons I was put off was coming out and having the whole place look kind of sketchy. There are sketchy places, especially downtown. There are sketchy places. So that's one of the big issues with renting from Nigeria, not seeing the place before you rent, And sometimes having someone else rent for you can also land you in a bad situation because they might just be picking any place. There are sketchy places in Canada, so have that in mind when you're renting. When you go, it's always better to go and see the place in person, take a feel of the environment. Are you going to be comfortable walking around, at night? Are the streets well lit? You don't want to feel unsafe in your environment, especially as a woman. So I would say make sure you check and see. And if you go to Reddit, I always forget to mention Reddit, but Reddit is such a good resource here in Canada. Honestly, I think I'll make another video on like resources you can use as a new Canadian or as a new immigrant in Canada. My point is, if you go to Reddit, you will find out about most of the areas that you are considering. If you go to I think I've even seen a map of Edmonton where different areas were labeled different names. If I can find it, I'm going to put it on this video so that you can see what that looks like. But my point is, not all areas are created equal. Please make sure that you are picking a safe space, that you are comfortable working at night, especially because if you don't have a job yet, what if you have to pick night shifts and you have to come back and it's late? Have that in mind. 6 is proximity to essentials. This one is just like the transit one, but transit takes a huge part of your life, so that's why I made it a point of its own. But if you're come landing and you're not going to have a car for a couple of months, you want to be as close to essentials as possible. By essentials, I mean grocery stores, pharmacies, banks. It really does help your life. I made a video on the things you have to do as a newly landed permanent resident. You can find that on my channel. And one of the things that makes doing those things, like getting your SIN, and opening a bank account, getting a phone number, easier, is if you are close to a strip mall, for example. It makes your life easier in the first days. But that being said, your life going forward, I live close to a Walmart twice. It made a huge difference in my life when I wanted to get groceries very quickly. Honestly, if I think about it now, it also made me spend a lot of money unnecessarily. But it did make my life very easy when I did not have a car, or when we did not have a car. So having groceries close by, just at walking distance, it makes it easier. If you're packing groceries in -30 in a bag and you are jumping the bus, it's very stressful. And even if you say you want to take Uber, that's another cost. So if you are planning to spend $200 on your groceries, now you're spending $250 because you are planning to take Uber. Taking a bus is cheaper. So as much as possible, if you can find a home near a transit center and also near a grocery store, grocery stores, near your bank, it makes your life easier. 7, this one is very important, is flexibility of the lease. Now you want to check and see if it's a month-to-month lease or a yearly lease or a 2-year lease. You want to see if you can sublet. You want to see what's the penalty for breaking the lease, especially as a newcomer. When you are more settled, there are some things that you can have more wiggle room for, but when you are new and you are trying to pinch your pennies, it's very important you take note of this. So in the beginning, especially if you're staying, for example, in a shared apartment, you want to hopefully get a place with a monthly lease so that if it's not looking good, you can leave at any time. If you get a yearly lease, you have to stay the full year in the place. And if you want to break the lease, for most places, you would have to find someone else to come and take your lease, and you would advertise on marketplace. Sometimes you will not see somebody, sometimes you will see somebody. So have that in mind, especially if you're not 100% confident in the place you're taking. Your best bet is to take a monthly lease. Things like subletting, sometimes you take a place and then you realize, it will be cheaper for me to have someone pay some of this rent with me. And depending on whether you have a landlord or whatever, you might not be able to, they might not want you to do that. I have a friend whose landlord, she was in a shared apartment, whose landlord did not want someone to come and stay with her, even as a visit, not to talk of, staying long term, like 1 month. So have that in mind when you are picking a place. And also, what is the penalty for breaking the lease? Are they taking 1 month's rent from you? Blah, blah, blah. Just in case you don't find anybody on marketplace and you want to break the lease, you have to know all that information. For my final tip is that try not to rush. Don't rush to sign any lease, especially if it's not a monthly lease. Monthly lease is your best bet so that you can take your time and always change your mind. As much as possible, start with a temporary place like a basement, a shared apartment, so that it can give you enough time to figure out your situation. That's what most people do. Don't jump into things because, I've landed in Canada and I have a lot of money to splurge. Yes, but that money can finish pretty quickly, especially if it's not being, replenished. Choosing where to rent in Canada is not just honestly about how expensive it is or how beautiful it is. It's all about the quality of life. So consider all the things that I have mentioned. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, share, comment, engage in whatever form, and share it to anyone who's planning to land to help them make some of their decisions when renting. Leave a comment in the comment section for me. I like to hear from you, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye guys.